Hello once again, this is your professor, Dr. Benjamin Cabrera. I'll be teaching for today all about the female gonads and the intricacies of being female. Okay, so let's start studying. There are two phases of the female reproductive function. One is the preparation of the body for conception and pregnancy, and another would be the period of pregnancy. Now, there are at least two functions of the gonads. One is the production of the gametes and the production of hormones. So the production of hormone makes it necessary for the maintenance of the reproductive system. Now we go to the anatomy. Okay, so the parts of the female reproductive tract would be the gonads, which are the ovaries, and the female reproductive tract comprising of the oviducts, uterus, cervix, vagina, and the external genitalia. So let's see the internal reproductive organs of the female. So looking at the anterior view, so we have your uterus, the fallopian tube, the ovaries, and the cervix with the vagina, with the vaginal introitus, and in here would be the urethral opening. On the sagittal view, you can see the relationship of the female reproductive system to the urinary system and the gastrointestinal system. So it's in between. Okay, so this is your uterus, this is the urinary bladder, and this is the rectum. Now let's go to the regulation or hormonal regulation of the female reproductive system, the Hypo, Pituitary, Gonadal axis. So what are the important gland in this system? One would be the hypothalamus. Okay, in the hypothalamus, it will now be releasing your GnRH or your gonadotropin releasing hormone. The anterior pituitary will be releasing the follicle stimulating hormone and the luteinizing hormone in response to the GnRH. And then the end organ would be the ovaries, wherein estrogen and progesterone are produced in response to FSH or the LH. And this is the female menstrual cycle. So the female menstrual cycle is characterized by monthly rhythmical changes in the secretion of the female hormones. It averages around 28 days, and only a single ovum is released each month. So unfortunately, at birth, the ova of the female are limited, so they do not. What you are born with will be the one that will be used up. There will be no more production after that, only maturation. And with this cycle, the uterine will always be, once you're menstruating, it is in preparation for possible pregnancy. And this is a nice representation of the ovary, containing all the follicles from primary to secondary, even to early tertiary follicle, in the cumulus and the corpus luteum, the corpus albicans. In here we have the adrenergic nerve supply and the spiral artery. And this is the medulla of the ovary. On the periphery would be the cortex. So on the middle would be the medulla, and the periphery would be the cortex. And the primordial follicle are the earliest and simplest follicular structure. It represents the ovarian reserve of the follicles. The rate at which primordial follicles develop or die will determine here is very important. The rate at which primordial follicle develop or die will determine the reproductive lifespan of a woman. Unfortunately, reproductive lifespan of a woman is limited. So when they go to puberty, they start to menstruate or menarche. Later on the fourth decade of life, okay, they start now to consume all the egg and stop ovulating. That would be the terminology for menopause. Okay, the meat has undergone most of the prophase or first meiotic division and arrest at deep lutein stage. The primordial follicle. Let's talk about the primordial follicle. So it is uh, the start or the youngest phase of an egg. So the decision to enter early growth phase depends on the intra-ovarian paracrine factors from the follicular cells or oocytes. Thus, from an initial of 7 million, okay, at birth there will only be around 300,000. Okay, when the woman starts to ovulate, it's only 450 times now during her reproductive life. So from a start of 7 million at birth, there will only be 300,000. When the woman ovulates, it's around 450 times only the chance to ovulate and the chance to be pregnant. Okay, let's talk about the growing pre-anther follicles. So from a primary follicle, this is from a primordial follicles, it's now matured to the primary follicle. The primary follicle will be surrounded by a single layer of granulosa cells. And later, as this mature, it becomes the secondary follicle with multi-layered. Now there's a multi-layer of epithelium as granulosa cells proliferate to become the mature preantral follicle, in which there will be theca cells. These are the theca cells are added around the granulosa cells. Then later on, the zona pellucida develops around the oocytes, consisting of your zone P1, ZP2, and your ZP3. At this point, the granulosa cells will now begin to express follicle-stimulating hormone receptors. Okay, but they only produce receptors, but no steroid hormone yet produced. So in this stage, they are still very dependent on the local factors from oocytes for the granulocytes to grow. Okay, so they are still very dependent. They may have already expressed the receptors for the FSH until later on menstruation, and they can have the FSH will now be receptors will now be receiving a follicle stimulating hormone. So as a growing antral follicle becomes dependent on the FSH for growth, now there will be a filled space that develops within the granulosa cells that coalesce to form the antrum, which divides the granulosa cells into two. Okay, the mural granulosa cells and the cumulus cells or cumulus oophorus. And later on, they will be developing to the large antral follicles, and development to reach this stage may take several months. So at this point, there will be the beginning of your gonadotropin-dependent development, and large antral follicles around the largest will be 5 mm are recruited to undergo rapid growth phase, with a rapid increase in FSH towards the end of a previous menstrual cycle. As time goes, okay, the oocyte will gain meiotic competence but will maintain meiotic arrest until ovulation. Then your follicle-stimulating hormone will stimulate now the synthesis of your aromatase enzyme, which is your CYP19, and it will convert the androstenedione and testosterone into your 17-beta estradiol in the granulosa cells. At this point, the mural granulosa cells also synthesize the inhibin B. Estrogen and inhibin B will cause negative feedback to FSH levels, causing decline in FSH, and in this point there will be selection of the dominant follicle to be released. So from the dominant follicle will come from 5 to 20 recruited large antral follicles. As FSH declines, on the previous slide, the largest follicle with the greatest number of FSH receptors becomes the dominant follicle. Okay. And after this one, all the other follicles that were recruited will undergo atresia. So the dominant follicle will still be in meiotic arrest. Now, the growth of the oocyte will continue, but at a very slow rate. Now, the selected follicle becomes a significant. Okay, the selected follicle will become the significant steroidogenic gland, and in this follicle, the theca cell will develop your cholesterols, your low density, high density, and your luteinizing hormone receptors. So this is a very good representation of what happens, okay, from this is the theca cell, and this is your granulosa cell, and that device, it would be your basal lamina, and this is the blood vessel. So blood vessel, with the entry of LH to the LH receptor, it will now start the expression of your steroidogenic enzymes, and also the expression and activation of your star protein. Okay. And also with the entry of cholesterol from the blood vessel, and it will be acted upon by star protein and your CYP11A1, and it will be converted to pregnenolone and further acted upon by 3-beta HSD to produce your progesterone, and further acted upon by your CYP17 to produce your 17-hydroxyprogesterone. With repeated action of your CYP17 will produce your androstenedione, and it will be returned back. It will be secreted and goes to the blood vessel, and a part of this understand your 17-beta HSD will now convert your androstenedione to your testosterone, and again it will be distributed to the blood vessel, to the systemic circulation. So this is from the theca cells, and this is through the action of your LH and your FSH. Your granulosa cells will have the receptors for your FSH, once there is the hormone receptor will interact, it will now stimulate the expression of the LH receptor in the granulosa cell, and there will be expressions of your CYP19, the enzymes. Okay, so from the androstenedione produced in the theca cell, it will be distributed to the granulosa cells, and this androstenedione will be acted upon by the aromatase enzyme to produce your estrone, and further acted upon by your 17 beta HSD to produce your estradiol 17 beta. Okay, and another pathway would be the androstenedione being acted upon by your 17 beta HSD to produce your testosterone, then acted upon by the aromatase enzyme to produce your estradiol. So the end product of the hormonal stimulation of your FSH will be the production of your estradiol in your theca cells, granulosa cells, and the productions in your theca cell will be your androstenedione and your testosterone. So these are the two steroid hormone produced, okay, in the theca cells and in the granulosa cells. So granulosa would be 17 estradiol 17 beta. In your theca cells, it would be your androstenedione and your testosterone. And then how about what will happen to the dominant follicle during periovulatory period? So in the periovulatory period is the time from which the LH will have a surge, will increase, which will result to the expulsion of your cumulus oocyte complex from the ovary. Okay. This is there will be marked by a change in the steroidogenic function of the theca and granulosa cells. Will undergo the process of luteinization. Luteinization simply means the formation of your corpus luteum, which will later on produce high amounts of your progesterone along with your estrogen. Then also in this period, the oocyte finally progresses to metaphase 2 due to the LH surge, and after progressing to metaphase 2, it now be arrested until it will meet the sperm of its life until fertilization. So both the theca and granulosa cells express your luteinizing hormone receptors. What will happen if what happens in LH surge? Okay, with LH surge, it induces a shift in the granulosa cell estrogenic activity, resulting to estrogen production, increased expression of your LDL and HDL, breakdown of the basal lamina, and vascularization of your granulosa cells, and increase the expression of your star protein and your CYP11A1 and your 3 beta HSD, okay, to produce more progesterone. So this is the steroidogenic pathway in the corpus luteum. So the product of this would be the production of your androstenedione, estradiol 17 beta, and your progesterone. Now let's talk about corpus luteum. So this is the corpus luteum. Okay. After it ruptured, okay, there are, you see, these are your athletic follicles. So the corpus luteum, after ovulation, becomes the remnant of the antral cavity So your corpus luteum is programmed to live only around 14 days unless your human gonadotropic chorionic gonadotropin or HCG will sustain it. It means there will be fertilization. If there's no fertilization, regression is due to rise in your prostaglandin in response to declining progesterone at the second week of luteal phase. Then regression later on changes it to corpus albicans. So the end product of an unfertilization from corpus luteum because it becomes your corpus albicans. So with the corpus luteum, there will be increased progesterone production at the onset of the LH surge, which peaks at the mid-luteal phase. So the purpose of it is to create uterine lining. Okay? So with increased production of estrogen, that is adhesive and supportive for possible implantation. So with the onset of your LH, it now will prepare the uterus for possible implantation by creating a uterine lining. Okay, but the initial decline in estrogen, but this rebounds in the mid-luteal phase, and your luteal hormone output is highly dependent on luteal hormone itself. But your LH and FSH levels decline by negative feedback from your progesterone produced and estrogen plus the production of your inhibin. Okay. If ever there will be a problem like shortened phase, luteal phase, shortened luteal phase now results to infertility. So the quality of your corpus luteum depends on the size and health of the dominant follicle, which it is developed and which is dependent on a normal hypothalamic and pituitary stimulation. So it now all interplays from your hypothalamus to pituitary to your ovaries. Then what is now the process of the involution of the corpus luteum? So the cause would be high levels of estrogen, or even to the extent of high progesterone level from the corpus luteum will give a negative feedback to the anterior pituitary, and with the negative feedback, it will now decrease the secretion of your FSH and LH. Thus, with the low levels of these two hormones, estrogen and progesterone production decreases. And in such case, lutein cells also secrete your inhibin, which will further decrease your FSH and LH. And the fall of your LH will cause the lack of stimulation of your corpus luteum, and later on your corpus luteum will degenerate, and your corpus luteum now becomes your corpus albicans. So let's talk about the ovarian cycle. Okay, so we have several phases. Okay, first would be your follicular phase. It is characterized by the recruitment and growth of 15 to 20 large antral follicles, as you can mention in the earlier slides. So there will be the follicular phase. There will be recruitment of around 15 to 20, and then later on, out of this 15 to 20, a dominant follicle will be selected, and that dominant follicle will grow until ovulation. Then after follicular phase will be your luteal phase. So in here, there's formation of corpus luteum, and there will be hormonal secretion. The corpus luteum now will predominate, and the small follicle will develop within the ovarian stroma, and the luteinizing hormone will convert the remaining granulosa theca cells after expulsion with the ovum to become your lutein cells. Lutein cells are, that is called your yellow cells due to lipid inclusions, which will now develop into your corpus luteum. The granulosa cells now, okay, here the granulosa cells will now secrete your progesterone and some estrogen, and the theca cells, okay, formalin will now form androstenedione and testosterone. So involution now will take about 12 to 14 days or after ovulation. Well, if after ovulation there will be a successful meeting up of the sperm and the egg, so the meeting up would be fertilization, and this fertilization will fertilized egg will now find itself to the uterine cavity, which has prepared initially for implantation. So in pregnancy, your human chorionic gonadotropin or ACG acts like LH, which prolong now the life of your corpus luteum for about 2 to 4 months, okay, of pregnancy. So again, in review, so from a primary follicles, it becomes your secondary follicles, becomes your oocyte. Okay. Later on, after becomes your dominant follicle, and there will be now be the process of ovulation with the expulsion of your oocyte, okay, or egg. Okay. What happens now? It becomes your lutein, okay, corpus luteum, the developing corpus luteum. Okay, so that's will in, and later on it will degenerate if to your corpus albicans. So, but once it is uh, the egg would be fertilized, okay, your corpus luteum will be prolonged. The life of it will be prolonged around 2 to 4 months of pregnancy. Now let's talk about the endometrial cycle, wherein you have two phases, your proliferative and your secretory phase. Okay, so for your proliferative phase, so it happens immediately after menstruation. So this phase is under the influence of estrogen, and at the time of ovulation, endometrium has increased its thickness, and in this phase, the endometrial glands in the cervical region secrete stringy mucus, and your estrogen induces expression of your progesterone receptors. And after your proliferative phase will be your secretory phase. So this is the second half of your menstrual cycle after ovulation has occurred. So in here, progesterone are secreted in large quantities by the corpus luteum, also estrogen during the late secretory phase. Your progesterone now will inhibit further endometrial growth, which now will oppose the effect of your estrogen. Thus, your progesterone induces uterine glands to secrete nutrient-rich product and induces change in the adhesibility of the surface epithelium, bring about what we call the window of receptivity. So in here on the second half of menstrual cycle, okay, after ovulation, and now if have paved a way for the potential or possible implantation. Progesterone causes marked swelling and secretory development of the endometrium. endometrial glands and blood vessels become more tortuous, and there will be note of your lipid and glycogen deposit. And this one, not only the purpose of this one is to produce a secretory endometrium with nutrients to nourish now. So it will now welcome implantation and the caring of the fertilized ovum when it implants. So approximately it is 7 to 9 days. The implantation happens around 7 to 9 days after ovulation. So this is now a very nice case. So this is your a representation of the endometrial lining during the secretory phase. So in here, uterine gland, you can see this is the endometrium and this is your myometrium. So in here, so there will now be in the secretory phase will now be the production of very large amount of blood vessels. Okay. Uterine glands to produce the secretions that will now be welcoming to the implant of fertilized ovum. So after the uterus have prepared itself, okay, from the proliferative phase to the secretory phase, to the secretory phase, it prepared now the endometrial lining. It created, it thickens now. After proliferative, it thickens and produce, and there will be production of many blood vessels, yes, to and place every nutrient-rich endometrial lining to welcome a fertilized ovum. But in instances that the ovum may not have met the sperm of his life or her life, it's her life, now that will be, there will be no fertilization. So when there is no fertilization of the ovum, okay, the corpus luteum degenerates and there will be withdrawal of your progesterone, so the progesterone level will decrease. And if this decreases, there will be a decreased stimulation of the endometrial cells and glands, and there will be loss of your lamina functionalis, and the tortuous blood vessels, as we can remember in the previous slide, will undergo vasospasm, and there will be decrease in the blood supply in the endometrial lining. Then the shedding of that lining will now ensue, what we call now the term menstruation. And in the process of menstruation, now it now undergoes another cycle, could be your early follicular phase. Okay. So the necrosis of endometrium and blood vessels will now cause areas of bleeding. So the necrotic areas at sites of bleeding desquamate and are shed, and also with the shedding, and the uterus will also contract due to prostaglandin to expel the necrotic material. Fibrinolysin is produced in the menstrual fluid, which will cause non-clotting of the menstrual blood. Okay, so this happens around 4 to 7 days after the onset of menses. Okay, the endometrial repitalization will usually start. So will now start signal now the start of your follicular phase. So it's just a cycle. Okay. So this is now a this one was the one that I drew when I was a medical student, because it really depicts the timing and phases of the whole menstrual cycle. So in here, so you can see this is your proliferative phase. Okay, of the uterus and the follicular phase of the ovary. Okay. And it starts, okay, and later on there will be ovulation. Okay. So ovulation, if it's not, okay, so it's on day 14, so 3 to 5, the start of your proliferative phase. Then on day 14 will be the day of your ovulation, approximately. And within 28 days, if there is no uh, ovulation, fertilization of that ovum that was expelled, the corpus luteum now will regress. So this now you see from proliferative becomes your secretory phase. So it is really waiting for a fertilized ovum to be implanted. But once there is no fertilization, okay, the corpus luteum will now regress, and there will be progesterone withdrawal. Then menstruation will ensue. So menstruation will ensue, and now you count now the first day of your menstrual period will be the first day, okay, of the start of the cycle. On the third or fifth day now will start now again your proliferative. So it's just a cycle. It goes and it goes again. Okay, so take note. For this is very good in lecturing your on menstruation, especially if you would be uh, discussing it for like preventing pregnancy, so you know the timing. Okay, and you can also now will be with this one, this is the normal cycle. So any problem with this normal cycle, like a shorter cycle, or will have a frequent menstruation or menometralgia, and you can see there will be problems in the timing of this of the cycle itself. Okay. So this is also a good representation of your hypothalamus, pituitary, and gonadal axis. From your hypothalamus, it produces your GnRH from anterior pituitary, and it will produce your FSH and LH. Okay. So in here, so once it is produced, there will be a peak of your LH. Okay. Then this one will trigger your ovulation. So this is the representation of the phases of the oocyte. So in here, once there is a after the secretion of your GnRH and the secretion of your FSH and LH by the anterior pituitary, there will be a mid-peak cycle. And in here, it coincides now. The rupture and release of the ovum. Okay. Once the ovum is not fertilized, now the corpus luteum now will regress and later on becomes your corpus albicans. So it also coincides with the phases, okay, of your endometrium here from here. So action of your LH and FSH will now also will coincide with your proliferative phase after the ovulation, will the start of your secretory phase, with the failure of fertilization and implantation. Now will now ensure your menstrual phase. Okay. So now let's talk about the different hormones that are involved, okay, in menstruation, and that are produced also by the gonads, female gonads. Now first, your estrogen. Okay. In estrogen, your beta estradiol is the most potent of the estrogens of ovarian origin. Your estrogen is the adrenal androgen source of estrogen in the menopausal women. And your estriol will be in is the weakest estrogen, which are also called your estrogen of pregnancy. So the most important form of estrogen will be your estradiol, and these are all steroids that are derived from cholesterol. In the blood, it's bound to albumin or sex hormone binding globulin, or your SHBG, and the liver will degrade estradiol to estriol and conjugates it with your glucuronizer sulfase and secrete it into the bile. So it is also your estrogen is responsible for growth and proliferation of specific cells, and it is also very important in the development of most secondary sexual characteristics of females. So this is the amount of secretions of your estrogen as measured in the urine. From the start of, there will be an initial peak during puberty in the time of menarche, and we'll have an increasing shift, and it now peaks around 20s to 30s. Then later on it decreases, and once it finally goes down, that would be the period of menopause, so around approximately 46 years old. So the function of estrogen in the reproductive system and the development of the breast. So the estrogen is responsible for the enlargement of the external genitalia and the position of fat in the mons pubis and other parts of the body, like in the hips. At the back. So, and with estrogen, the vaginal epithelium changes from cubital epithelium to stratified squamous, and estrogen is also responsible for the enlargement of the uterus and other internal reproductive organs. So estrogen is responsible for the proliferation of your endometrial stroma and development of your endometrial glands in the proliferative changes. It increases the activity of the fallopian tube cilia in the event that there will be fertilization, so it will be sweeping towards the uterus. Development of stromal tissues of the breast, and the growth of breast ductal system, and the position of breast fat. Bone growth and formation of stimulating osteoblasts. It inhibits osteoclast but later promotes epiphyseal closure, and it has a calciotrophic effect and is also responsible for slight nitrogen balance. So the effect of estrogen in the liver is it increases the expression of your low-density lipoprotein receptors and increases the circulating levels of your high-density lipoproteins. So the overall effect of estrogen in the liver is improved lipoprotein profile, and there's an increase in the synthesis of the following transport proteins, like your transcortin, your steroid hormone binding globulin, and your testosterone binding globulin. So the cardiovascular system is that it increases nitric oxide secretion, thus causing more vasodilation. It inhibits platelet activation, so the overall effect of estrogen would be cardioprotective. Effect of estrogen in the central nervous system would be neuroprotective by inhibiting cell death in response to hypoxia, and it causes a positive androgenic effect, which is a stimulant to the CNS. For the adipose tissue, okay, the overall effect of estrogen is lipolysis by decreasing the activity of the lipoprotein lipase and stimulates the hormone-sensitive lipase. And so loss of estrogen will mean reposition of excess fat. So that's what happens when in periods of menopause, then female now becomes will have more fat deposition. So the other effects of estrogen, okay, it will slightly increase metabolic rate, increase deposition of fat in subcutaneous tissues like the breast and buttocks, but there is no significant effect in the hair distribution. It smoothness and softens skin texture, the skin becomes more vascular and warm, and it also causes sodium water retention by the kidney. And now we talk about the transport and metabolism of the female sex hormones. 60% of estrogen are bound to the sex hormone binding globulin, while 20% are bound to albumin and 20% as free fraction. The progesterone binds to transcortin and albumin, and the low affinity of progesterone for transport proteins renders its short half-life, which is around less than 5 minutes. And these sex hormones are degraded in the liver, conjugated to sulfates or glucuronide, and are excreted in the urine as estriol and estrone. Now for progestins, okay, so transport progestins, so progesterone is the most important type of progestin. Okay, it's also a steroid hormone derived from cholesterol. It is secreted in the later part of the menstrual cycle by the corpus luteum, and it prepares the uterus for possible pregnancy and the breast for lactation. So that's the action of your progesterone. So it is once there is fertilization and corpus luteum will be the life of the corpus luteum will be prolonged. The corpus luteum will produce more of the progesterone because it prepares the uterus for pregnancy and the breast for future lactation. So the functions of progesterone is it promotes secretory changes in the uterine and endometrium. It induces the window of receptivity, meaning it increases adhesiveness of the uterine endometrium around on day 20 to 24. It decreases the frequency intensity of uterine contraction, so that will not expel the fertilized ovum. Increase secretion of your fallopian tube mucosa. Your progesterone has thermogenic effect and also causes thermogenic resetting of the hypothalamic set point, okay, and promotes development of lobules and alveoli of the breast. And this slide will show us the relationship of the temperature during the menstrual cycle, otherwise called your basal body temperature. Okay, so there is a sudden increase of your temperature after the onset of ovulation, and it will now be sustained until and goes down at day 28 to your pre-ovulatory temperature. So the increase of your temperature coincides with the release of the ovum, what we call ovulation. Now for the anovulatory cycles, the cause of your anovulatory cycles will be there will be LA surge, okay, So the LH surge is not great enough to cause ovulation. No corpus luteum is formed, so no progesterone is secreted. Okay. Usually happens at the onset of puberty and during the perimenopausal period. So these are your anovulatory cycles. This is the explanation for this one. Now let's talk about puberty. Okay. Puberty is the onset of adult sexual life. During infancy, the reproductive system is quiescent. Then later on, it is initiated by maturation process in some areas of the brain. It starts when the hypothalamus suddenly starts secreting your uh, gonadotropin releasing hormone. Then later on, with the action of your gonadotropin releasing hormone, your pituitary will gradually increase the secretion of your gonadotropic hormones like your LH and your FSH at around 8 years, peaking at 11 to 16 years of age. Okay. The ontogeny of the reproductive system. Okay. There is transient increase during gestation and infancy in childhood of the hormones uh, mentioned earlier. In childhood, there is absence of your FSH and your LH, but at puberty now begins to secrete large amount of your FSH and LH. So the reproductive lifespan of females is determined by the ovarian reserve, the degree of follicular development. So you can remember you'll be able to ovulate around 450 times during your lifetime. But with your 450 times, uh, around there will be around uh, 12 to 15 follicles that will be recruited, but out of those numbers, only one will be chosen. So among the chosen, you'll have ovulation, and you have 450 chances of ovulation. So after ovulation, once you lost now estrogen, uh, menopause will ensue. This is a beautiful representation of the relationship of your FSH and LH as to the phases of development for both male and female. So this is female, this is male. So around childhood, from gestation to infancy, initially your FSH and LH are high, then later on it goes down, then and starts to increase at puberty. Okay, for males, it will just be sustained, a little bit higher but sustained, and it increases at senescence. Okay. But for females, once in the process of menstruation and ovulation, menstruation, possible pregnancy, so you'll have a decrease and increase of the levels of your FSH and LH. It's noteworthy that during childhood, the level of your FSH is greater than your LH, but during the adult reproductive period, it now shifts that makes the LH greater than your FSH. Okay. And later on the senescence or menopausal period, it now goes back again that your FSH is still greater than your LH. So in here, so this is the representation of gonadotrophic secretion in males and females as measured using urinary gonadotropins. Okay. So at the age of 10, before puberty, it's very low. But after puberty, it increases. For male, it just the same representation from the previous slide, and for the female, so it increases, then goes down during, starts to go down during menopausal period. So let's talk about the menopause. Okay. So the menopause is the depletion of the ovarian follicles. It is age-related. Okay. That there's the drop in estrogen and progesterone, and there's a rise in FSH, more of FSH than LH. So the menstruation cycle becomes irregular and unovulatory later on. Then cycle shortens, especially the follicular phase. So the primary source of estrogen, which is testosterone, now shift to adrenal androgens. And it will now, menopause will now show the signs and symptoms of estrogen deficiency, like bone loss, vaginal epithelium atrophy, and cardiovascular diseases, because you know estrogen is cardioprotective. Okay. Now, so after, let's talk about now pregnancy and lactation. In pregnancy, there's a switch of productions of your gonadotropin and gonadal steroids from maternal HPA to the placenta. And this switching will maintain a quiescent gravid uterus, okay, which ensures fetal nutrition in utero, ensures fetal nutrition after birth by preparation of the breast, determine the timing of labor and delivery, and plays a role in fetal testosterone production. So this is a very good representation of the whole phases of your, from ovulation to implantation. So once the ovum is released as a secondary oocyte and the egg meets the sperm of its life among thousands and even millions of sperms that rise to fertilize it. So after fertilization, there will be a formation of zygote. Okay. Then cell division ensures multiplication, then becomes your blastocyst, which implants on day 7, and later on the development of your embryo. So these are all made possible by the prepared uterine lining. Okay. So the blastocyst consists of their inner cell mass and outer trophoblast. So upon implantation, the trophoblast differentiates into two cell types, the cytotrophoblast and the syncytial trophoblast. So the cytotrophoblast continuously divides, while your syncytial trophoblast will have three major functions. First is to become to produce adhesive function by producing cadherins and integrins. It manifests invasive function, so it implants and invades through, which causes your interstitial implantation, and it will now have the endocrine function by producing human chorionic gonadotropin by 10 weeks, and then later on progesterone. So other functions would be a bidirectional placental transfer of gases, nutrients, and waste products via diffusion, active transport, and facilitated diffusion and pinocytosis or cell drinking. So the decidual cells of the endometrium will serve as early source of nutrition in early stages. And the decidua also secretes tissue inhibitors of metalloproteinases that ensures regulated innovation during implantation. And later on, the placenta may proceed to supply some nutrition by around the 16th day after implantation. So this is the representation of hormones of pregnancy. So in here we have the duration of pregnancy and the levels of your HCG and the levels of your estrogens and your progesterones. So your HCG is colored red. So during ovulation and implantation and pregnancy, so it will be increased now, and later on the action of your LH, you can have your HCG and decreases, then later on plateaus until on the 40th week of gestation will be the delivery. While your estrogen, colored blue, after ovulation it increases and steadily increases, significantly increased at 24th week age of gestation, and continues to increase even after parturition. It is the same behavior was noted, with your progesterone, but the initial phase progesterone will be more than your estrogen, but after the 24th week, estrogen now has a higher level than your progesterone, but still they both will be increased until the period of parturition. So your HCG, or your human chorionic gonadotropin, that would be the basis of your pregnancy test. It would be the beta subunit, and it is responsible for the morning sickness, which is and it is detectable in the maternal serum within 2 hours of implantation. So those that uses a higher sensitivity determination of your HCG, beta HCG. Now, if that will become positive, so it means there is now implantation. Then the level of your HCG doubles every 2 days for the first 6 weeks, then peaks at 10 weeks. We'll have a similar to LH and binds to your LH receptors. The long beta subunit and more sites for your glycosylation, then LH increases in its half-life to 24 to 30 hours and thus build up in the plasma. So again, your human chorionic gonadotropin is the basis for your pregnancy test, and it causes your morning sickness. So the action or function of your HCG would be to prevent involution of your corpus luteum by stimulating the LH receptors, resulting to a maintained high levels of your progesterone during the first 10 weeks of pregnancy. Since it is similar to your LH, it stimulates your interstitial cells of the fetus to secrete testosterone before the fetal gonadotropic axis matures. Now, the estrogen as estriol is secreted by your corpus luteum initially, then by the placenta. It increases around 30 times near the end of pregnancy, and the production is dependent on the health of the fetus and may be used to assess fetal health. So the effect of estrogen as estriol is to increase uteroplacental blood flow. It causes breast enlargement and growth of your glandular tissue directly and indirectly. It causes the enlargement of the fetus, enlargement of the female external genitalia, and it also causes relaxation of the pelvic ligaments the symphysis pubic sacroiliac joints to become elastic and limber in preparation to parturition. Now, let's talk about progesterone. Okay, so progesterone is actually the hormone of pregnancy. It increases around 10 times during pregnancy, and placental production is usually unregulated. It's independent of your star. Okay, uh, it usually comes from your corpus luteum, then placenta at the 8th week of pregnancy. So there is what we call your luteal placental shift. So from corpus luteum, then later on it degenerates, and when the placenta takes over, it is used by fetal cortex in the late pregnancy to synthesize cortisol. So what are the effects of your progesterone? So it causes development of decidual cells for nutrition. It has a quiescent effect on the uterus and prepares the lobules and alveoli of the breast for lactation, and increases the secretion of your fallopian tubes and uterus prior to implantation. So your human chorionic somatotropin or human placental lactogen, well, is very similar to your growth hormone and your prolactin. The amount is produced correlates with your placental size. So what are the metabolic effects of this hormone? It acts as your fetal growth hormone. It stimulates the production of IGF-1 and IGF-2. Like your growth hormone causes protein deposition and is lipolytic. It goes against or antagonizes insulin, which is the basis of your diabetogenicity of pregnancy. Okay. Decreases glucose uptake and utilization of the mother, and increases release of the free fatty acid from your maternal stores for maternal metabolism. Though your human chorionic somatotropin is not essential for pregnancy, but and causes partial breast development together with your estrogen, progesterone, and your prolactin. Now let's talk about the condition of diabetes in pregnancy. Okay, so pregnancy will induce a insulin resistant state. In late pregnancy, metabolism shift from anabolic to catabolic with fat utilization and sparing of your glucose. The peripheral responsiveness to insulin decreases. That's why there is the diabetogenicity of your pregnancy. Okay. All of these hormones will decrease the level of insulin insensitivity. Okay. From human prolactin to your estrogens and progesterone. Okay, then let's talk about the process of giving birth or parturition. Then the pregnancy will usually last for around 40 weeks. Parturition is the process wherein the uterine contractions lead to childbirth. So there are 3 stages of labor. The stage 1, 2, and 3. Stage 1 will be uterine contractions, forceful uterine contractions that pushes the fetus against the cervix, causing dilatation and effacement or thinning of the cervix in hours. And later on, it goes to your stage 2, which is the delivery of the fetus, which is usually less than 1 hour. And stage 3 would be the delivery of the placenta and contraction of the uterus to stop bleeding. That should be around 10 minutes. So this is the positive feedback theory of labor. Okay. So as the uterus contracts, it pushes now the baby downwards, and it now stretches and thins out the cervix. Okay. This is the cervix, and then the cervical stretch will excite from the contraction further and pushes the baby down and stretches the cervix some more. So, and as the baby goes down, uh, there will be a cycle of cervical stretching and fundic contraction until the baby is expelled. Now for parturition, the placental corticotropin releasing hormone and fetal adrenal axis are noted to increase in the late pregnancy and in labor. It stimulates the fetal ACTH secretion, thereby resulting to fetal cortisol and fetoplacental estrogen production. Your placental CRH and fetal adrenal axis will promote myometral contraction by sensitizing the uterus to produce prostaglandins and oxytocin. And also it correlates labor with cortisol-induced maturation of fetal lungs and GIT. For the estrogen and progesterone secretion, it is noted that there is no change in the ratio of these two hormones in humans. For oxytocin, it causes a powerful uterine contraction. So it's the oxytocin that is responsible for the uterine contraction. It increases uterine sensitivity before parturition. Increased secretion with the stretch of the cervix. Okay, and estrogen stimulates the synthesis of your oxytocin receptors. Progesterone inhibits your oxytocin receptors. Though oxytocin is not thought to initiate labor because the levels only increase after parturition has been. So that's the evidence that oxytocin will not initiate labor, but only found after parturition has begun. Now for prostaglandins, your prostaglandin F2A and E2 will increase your uterine motility. It is noted that there is an increased level during parturition, and the rise in estrogen in late pregnancy may stimulate prostaglandin synthesis. Now for the uterine size, uterine stretches stimulates prostaglandin production. Okay. Then for lactation, so the hormones responsible for breast development will be your estrogen and progesterone. Okay, your estrogen will cause fat deposition and shape, the development of stroma in the ductal system, and estrogen will increase the prolactin secretion, while the progesterone will promote growth of the lobule, the budding of the alveoli, and the development of the secretory characteristics. And it inhibits the onset of milk production and secretion while it is not yet time for production of milk. Okay, so this is a representation of the breast during pregnancy with the development of deposition of fat, okay, the development of the lobules and the alveoli, okay, and the development later of your lactus sinus, okay, and the nipple-areolar complex. So the lobule, when magnified, contains now the milk secreting epithelial cells. So this is the ductules. Okay. So now there's the milk, and the myoepithelial cells will be the one to squeeze. Okay, help release the milk. Now let's talk about prolactin. So prolactin in the initiation of lactation. So your prolactin will be coming from the anterior pituitary gland, and it promotes milk secretion or galactopoiesis. Progesterone inhibits milk production by prolactin during pregnancy. Okay, but the sudden fall of progesterone at delivery releases the inhibition of the prolactin, thus initiating milk production and secretion. During pregnancy, estrogen stimulates prolactin secretion. Suckling provides stimulus for prolactin release during nursing period. So this slide depicts the relationship of your progesterone, color black, and your estrogen, color blue, and the prolactin, colored red, okay, in relation to parturition and weeks after parturition. So during parturition, all of these are increased. Okay, so estrogen will increase prolactin, but then later on, as parturition, both levels would both hormones, estrogen and progesterone, decreases, and there will be spikes of your progesterone, regular spikes, okay, a bit of increase, and your prolactin production decreases or increases in response to suckling effect, intermittent secretion of prolactin during nursing, and along with the influence of both your estrogen and your progesterone. So the control of prolactin secretion, in normal control, your hypothalamus releases your prolactin inhibitory hormone, but in lactation, okay, the hypothalamus releases your prolactin releasing hormone, or especially during suckling, to cause prolactin surges. Okay. Prolactin also inhibits the release of your gonadotropin releasing hormone, thus inducing what we call lactational amenorrhea. Now let's talk about the milk ejection effect of your oxytocin. So oxytocin is stored and released from the posterior pituitary gland. It causes ejection or letting down, or milk let down, from the alveoli through the contraction of the surrounding myoepithelial cells. So it's the oxytocin that is responsible for that. So the stimulus for the release of oxytocin would be suckling, auditory signals like hearing the baby cry, then later on there will be milk let down. The metabolic drain of lactation on the mother. Okay, so what is the effect, okay, of lactation in the mother? Lactation may drain the mother of the following. The mother may lose around 50 grams of fat per day. The production of conversion of lactose from glucose around 100 grams per day. And the production of calcium phosphate for the milk would be around 2 to 3 grams per day, and also with vitamin D. The parathyroid gland enlarges the bones and may decalcify to compensate. Okay, so all of this should be present, okay, in the milk. So in the milk production, these are all coming from the mother. Okay, so the fat, the lactose, calcium, and vitamin D. So the mother will bear the production of these substances, okay, as the ingredients of the milk. Okay, so that's it. So again, thank you very much for your patience in learning, and hopefully this is a quite long lecture, and hopefully you'll understand it again, and you are just free to go through it by going to my YouTube channel. So it's now posted in the YouTube, so please click like and subscribe, so and you can share the video, the lecture, to other medical students. Thank you and have a great day.